So now we're going to come to cutting a record, but before we can do that, we need to make sure that we have a few things in place. Now, the first thing that is utmost important is to keep dust away from the surface of the lacquer. Now, the lacquer needs to be completely clean because any imperfections on there, any dust that gets on there can and probably will come out on the final pressing if you're not careful. So we need to wear anti-static lab coats and silk gloves to stop any fingerprints or anything getting onto the surface. So over here we have our lacquer, which is on the plaster of the turntable, and it's securely fastened down using a puck. This here is the cutting head. Signal gets sent into that. It is, and some powerful magnets move the stylus. We have a ruby stylus, very tiny ruby stylus under here, which cuts into the surface of the record and creates the shape of the waveform that, which is the sound of the music. In here as well, we also have a heating element which heats the stylus to a specific temperature that is set according to the best sound it creates on the lacquer. So we have different kinds of lacquers. We're currently using MDC lacquers. Our lathe is set up to heat the stylus to cut as efficiently through the MDC lacquers as it can, with as little noise as possible. Over here we have a gauge here, which shows us the pressure of helium that we send through to the cutting amps. So whereas we want to heat the stylus of the ruby, we need to keep the cutting heads cool. The things that drive the needle in different directions, we need to keep them as cool as possible. So we use helium to do that. So this is our helium gauge. On the back wall here, we have our pitch gauge. Now that is controlled by this pitch wheel here. The pitch is how wide the grooves are spaced, and that's determined by how fast the stylus moves across the surface of the lacquer as it's spinning. Usually you find with louder pieces of music, the waves are a lot wider and a lot more agitated. So we need to widen the space between them to allow room for the wider, louder grooves. And we do that, this is a manual lathe, so we do that by hand, judging by the position of the needle on there. Obviously, the wider you have the grooves, the less amount of time you can have on the space of on the side of the lacquer. So you need to take that into consideration. You need to do lots of tests to see whether there's enough space on the lacquer to fit all of your music. Another thing here, we have our heat gauge here. So this changes the amount of heat that the stylus creates in order to cut through the record. We have it set just right for this particular lacquer. We also have our platter speed, so depending on whether you're going to cut a 45 RPM record or a 33 RPM record, in this case we're going to cut a 12-inch 33, we need to have that set to the correct speed here. The next thing that we need to do is, before we start cutting, is clean the stylus, and with that we use acetone and a piece of pith, which is the center part of a tree. This is super absorbent stuff. And what can happen is you can get little bits of swarf, which are the offcuts from previous lacquers getting stuck to the ruby. And we need to make sure they're cleaned off because they can create problems when they're cutting the groove. So I'm gonna give this a careful clean. You just soak up some of the acetone into the pith here. And we gently wipe it off the stylus. Okay. And we're going to get our platter spinning. So set it to 33 RPM. Let's turn on our helium. And we're going to make sure that we start our record cutting from 12 inches, which is going to be the size of our record. So we've got our gauge here, so we know when to start. We're going to put it just after 12 inches to allow for a run-in groove when we do the final cut. We're going to make sure the start diameter for the micro switches, which are adjusted here, we're going to make sure they're set for LP, which is 12 inches, and the finish diameter is set for LP, which is, so to allow for the LP sized labels for the center. We don't want them to cut over that or under that. Okay. We then need to set the monitor to feedback. This button here, we're going to set this monitor to feedback for the cutting amps, so we can hear what the lathe is cutting. We're going to make sure that our tape over there is lined up to start at the correct position for the side. And we're also going to make sure that our pitch is set to the correct number. So the way we do that, basically we've got a 22-minute side, and from previous cuts and previous experience, a pitch of 0.32 is about right for this length of side, for this kind of volume of music. So we're going to try it with this to start off with. All right, let me set the pitch. All right. Make sure this is again set to the right distance. Okay, and now we're ready to cut. So, helium on, platter spinning, we're at the correct speed, we're at the correct start diameter and finish diameter. We've set the pitch to be correct. We're good to go. We've got all of our elliptical filters and our high and low pass filters and everything in place and ready to go in order to protect the head. And we've got the tape lined up in the right place. So let's cut. The process of things is we've got our vacuum working. I'm going to press the main button, which is going to start moving the stylus across. I'm going to then drop the record head to arm the machine and to dig the stylus into the surface of the lacquer. I'm then going to press the run-in button, and that's going to create a run-in groove, which is the place where you initially drop your needle when you want to start a record. While that run-in groove stops working, once it stops engaging, I'm going to quickly run over and press the play button on the tape machine, and that should start the music cutting onto the lacquer. So let's give it a go. Okay, run-in groove.
And this one is called the Panther. The Panther.
So the things we're looking out for, we're checking to see if all of the levels are good on the PPM machine. We're checking to see if the arm is moving across the record properly. We're checking to see if the pitch is set to the correct level still, because it can vary. Checking our helium to see if it's still on. What else are we checking? Checking to see if there's any swarf which is being pushed away. It's checking that it's being vacuumed away efficiently and there's nothing trailing around, because you can get some serious swarf fires if there's anything gets caught up, if any excess gets caught up onto the head itself. It's made from nitrocellulose, so it's highly flammable. So it's the biggest cause of fires in studios, for cutting lathes at least, is swarf fire. So got to make sure you've got a good vacuum there. Yeah, it's going pretty smooth so far, but you've got to keep on checking. There's constant checks you have to do. So yeah, just doing basically a sweep of the room the whole time. So the tape's still running, the PPM's not going too high, nothing is on fire, pitch is still set at the right place. Yeah. So if there's bits that we've marked on the music where I'm going to have to widen the pitch, which there isn't on this, luckily, you kind of get ready and you widen it out. In a minute, we're gonna be creating a scroll on the surface is going to be the end of the track, and we need to identify where on the surface of the lacquer track 1 and track 2 start, so people can put their needle down on the record if they want to play track 2, for instance, so you can see it on the surface of the lacquer. So the way we do that is by scrolling the scroll wheel half a turn, which basically forces the needle across the surface of the lacquer and creates a gap between track 1 and track 2, while still keeping a continuous groove going throughout the record. So any minute now. And I've marked on the tape, I've marked with leader tape where that scroll is going to be. Okay. And scroll. And as you can see on the surface of the lacquer, that has now created a slight gap between the first track and now what is the second track.
It's hard to say. And of course we're talking.